Live. Let me just.
Okay.
Yeah.
Volume good.
Yeah. And I just start the live is already started,
Right.
so they can't see me, but they can hear me, I think. So.
Why don't you grab a chair and sit down, then they'll be able to see you as well.
No, they've already seen me.
Oh,
Enough.
all right.
So they have had enough of me. But thank you for people who came. We truly value your support to Karwaan, for your love for Jerry, your love for Sarbpreet, and your love for Sufi, music, poetry, etc. I won't take long. I would just be very short and welcome both our speakers today. Jerry Pinto, a known name for people who love Bombay. They know Jerry, and because I am researching on cinema, so I keep getting his name again and again in the work that I do. And we have Sarbpreet Singh. He has written many books, including Camel Merchant of Philadelphia. Then recently a book on the Sikh riots that happened in the 80s, and now a novel, The Sufi's Nightingale. So welcome to both of you. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this. It's an honor to host both of you for this book launch. People on Facebook can watch us live, and this will be also uploaded on YouTube channel of Karwaan. So we are really excited. So over to Jerry. Thank you so much, Jerry, for agreeing to do this.
Thank you, Shah, and thank you, Sarbpreet, for also agreeing to be in conversation. This is, I think, a very important book, and especially at this point in the history of the subcontinent. It is a message from the past, it's a message from the heart, and it's the message of music, it's the message of love. And the message that the spirit is actually not to be bound by names or by designations or by categories such as the religion into which one happens to be born. I think all spiritual traditions emphasize the unity of the human condition. That there is much more that binds us than separates us, and that what separates us is really a matter of one's own misunderstanding of how important certain labels or categories are. So Sarbpreet, I'd like to begin by asking you to tell us a little about this wonderful love story, the silsila literally, that happens between Lal Hussain and Madho back in the past, in a time when it was possible for a Hindu merchant to offer unstinting and uninflected support to a Muslim peer who is living on the road outside his house.
Thank you, Jerry. So, in your introductory remarks, you've already touched the soul of the novel. So thank you for that. And indeed, the story of Hussain and Madho is very unique, is very interesting, and also shrouded in mystery. We to this day, we really don't know what the true nature of their relationship was. What we do know is that they were tremendously attached to one another, so much so that Madho became Hussein's successor and headed the Sufi order after his passing. And to this day, both of them lie in the same mausoleum outside of Lahore. So I first encountered the story of Madho and Lal Hussain very serendipitously, really. I was researching one of my earlier books, The Camel Merchant of Philadelphia, which is set in the court of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. And I remember reading the accounts of European travelers who visited the king's court and also the official diarist. They wrote about a trip that the emperor took every Basant Panchami, the first day of spring, to the shrine of one Madho Lal Hussain. And I remember being very intrigued by the name. I get Madho or Madho Lal, I get Hussain, but Madho Lal Hussain? Was he Hindu? Was he Muslim? And that was not my main focus at that time. So I remember reading a little about it and discovered that, much to my surprise, it was not one individual, but two. Madho and Lal Hussain. Lal Hussain, he was so known as because he chose the very inappropriate red color for his robes, which was, obviously not a sanctioned color for holy men to wear at that time. And that's when I learned that over time their very identities had merged to the point where Madho and Hussain are collectively known as Madho Lal Hussain, and the poet Shah Hussain is also referred to as Madho Lal Hussain. It wasn't until several years later that I encountered the poetry of Shah Hussain, and at that time I didn't make the connection that this was the same Madho Lal Hussain. And before I wrote a single word, I spent a couple of years singing Shah Hussain's kafis. So this was a particularly melancholy point in my personal life for various reasons. And I'm a Sikh, of course, and music is very fundamental to Sikh practice. And ironically, after I left the country, I developed interest in Sikh music and in classical music. Not very uncommon for exiles. They usually start looking for their roots, as did I. So I had engaged with Sikh sacred music for quite some time, but never with Sufi music. So I was inspired to create these simple little compositions and sing Shah Hussain, which I did for a couple of years, which aroused a tremendous amount of curiosity, because the sort of narrative that runs through a lot of the poetry is an expression of pain, the pain of separation. And unfortunately, despite my attempts at translating some of the poetry, how exquisite that expression is can be experienced only in the original. And I can say that with a tremendous amount of confidence. So, very curious about Shah Hussain. Who was the man? What prompted this anguish? And I started reading a little, and then I thought, I must write a biography of Shah Hussain. So that's how I started out. Now, much to my dismay, very quickly I learned that biographical information about him was very, very thin. I mean, you're talking about the 15th century, where he was a relatively unimportant man. So there were bits and pieces, little snippets of information here and there, all the sources said more or less the same thing. Not enough to write a biography. So that's when the notion occurred to me that why not try and imagine the rest? And that's how the book came about. There's a lot of lore, which can't really be substantiated. It talks about the love of Shah Hussain for Madho. There are some writers who claim that some of the kafis are addressed to Madho. And there are other writers who have studied Sufi poetry and Bhakti poetry who dismiss the idea and say that, look, romantic poetry is the essence, or romance is the essence of a lot of devotional poetry as well, where in the Bhakti tradition, in the Sufi tradition, and indeed in the Sikh tradition, the poet sort of speaks in the feminine voice, addressing the beloved, who is referred to as the masculine. So, as I delved deeper, I found that I was unable to establish the true nature of the relationship between Shah Hussain and Madho. I'll tell you a bit of a funny story. So I read some academics who wrote in the 60s and 70s, most notably Dr. Mohan Singh Divana, who is given the credit for almost, quote, discovering Shah Hussain. He's the first one who published his kafis. Dr. Lajvanti Ramakrishna, who wrote about various Sufis. And they almost angrily dismissed the notion of any romantic relationship between Shah Hussain and Madho, offering somewhat interesting reasons to support their thesis, saying that this is all foreign to Indian culture and this is Iranian influence or Greek influence, whatever that means. And then you read some modern scholars like Scott Kugel, who point to a biography of Shah Hussain called Hakikat al-Fukra and say, how dare anyone say that this was not a romantic relationship? There's precedent in Sufi literature and in the lives of other Sufis. From my perspective, I am content, thoroughly content to let this remain a metaphysical mystery. From my perspective, they were deeply attached to one another. The poetry is beautiful. Interpret their relationship in modern times has really no bearing on the beauty of the poetry. And if you want a testament to their love, you just have to go visit the grave in Bhagwanpura, which I was fortunate to do a few years ago. So long-winded, I'm afraid, but that's what I know about the relationship between the two of them.
Sorry, the ways of the Sufi are generally long-winded. You must not have perfect, and I don't think anyone is. And I'd like to ask you another question, which is linked to your training as an engineer and your life as in technology. In the story, part of the story, a really important part of the story, is those moments that are part miracle and part transcendence, I think. For instance, the initiations seem to be moments in which a huge discharge of spiritual electricity happens. Consciousness is lost. There's physical contact, but it seems as if there's much more a fusing of spirit that is causing this to happen. And of course, there is the revitalizing story, the bringing back from the dead story. How does a man with scientific training approach this ground?
The answer is very easy. When I was young, I read 3 books that profoundly influenced me. Of course, I had no idea at that time that I was ever going to even think about writing, because my path seemed to take me in a very, very different direction. The first one was Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children. The second one was 100 Years of Solitude, and the third one was The Tin Drum. So, you can tell from that I'm a magic realism nerd, really. It really appeals to me at a very fundamental, visceral level, and all my rationalist and scientific thinking goes flying out of the window whenever I pick up something like that. So I've been a fan of that sort of writing ever since I was a young man, and some of the specific things that you talked about, the electric charge almost. So I found a conspirator in Dara Shikoh, who shows up in so many interesting places. So Dara Shikoh, was a Sufi himself, and he was intimately familiar with Mir, who appears in the book Mir Muhammad. So in some of his writings, Dara Shikoh writes about his Sufi practice and some of the experiences that he had in dealing with his Sufi masters. So some of that comes from Sufi lore or Sufi experience that practitioners like Dara Shikoh have documented. I just found it very, very fascinating. And the whole figure of no spoilers, so I can say this. Al-Khidr, who shows up at a couple of different times in Shah Hussain's life, and then all those stories swirl around him in his interactions with the Prophet Moses, for instance, Ibn al-Arabi, and others. So this was just a beautiful, fascinating world that I was just able to peep into as I was doing my research for the book.
In a conversation I think we had a little earlier today, you said that you've been singing.
Yes.
In this way. Would you, since music is such an integral part of this book, would you give us a couple of these?
I would be happy to sing a line or two with a couple of caveats. One of them is that I'm not a great singer by any stretch of the imagination, And of course, when I was in Delhi, I caught a massive cold. But I'll give it the old college try. So, pardon me. The first Sufi, the first Kafi is one of my favorites by Shah Hussain, and it's really nothing but an expression, a pure expression of love. So I'll sing a couple of lines, and then I'll talk about the Kafi a little briefly. Sajan de kal baha saadi, sajan de kal baha saadi, kyun kar aakhain chhad veya, sajan de kal baha saadi, sajan de kal baha saadi, postiyan ge post vaangu, postiyan de post vaangu, aman paya saade had veੜਿਆ, sajan de gal baha saadi, sajan de gal, sajan de gal, sajan de gal baha saadi. So I'll talk briefly about the poetry. ਸੱਜਣ ਦੇ ਗਲ ਬਾਹ ਸਾਡੀ, ਕਿਉਂ ਕਰ ਆਖਾਂ ਛੱਡ ਵੇ ਅੜਿਆ. So my arm is clasped around the neck of my lover or my beloved. Why would I ever let it go? That's the first line. The second line, ਪੋਸਤੀਆਂ ਦੇ ਪੋਸਤ ਵਾਂਗੂ ਅਮਦ ਪਿਆ ਸਾਡੇ ਹੱਡ ਦੇ ਅੜਿਆ. I'm like a drug addict. This love is like a drug, and it has pervaded me it's pervaded all the way to my bones. So this is the kind of poetry that Shah Hussain wrote. And I'm sorry that, translations do no justice. For the readers, I have provided a bit of a cheat sheet. So there's an author's note at the end. Now, when I've read stuff in translation, oftentimes I get very frustrated trying to figure out what the original is. So there's a little cheat sheet that gives you the transliterated first line of the Kafi in Punjabi. And of course, in this day and age, we're very fortunate that the poetry is all available online. So anyone who has the ability to engage with the original in Punjabi, I would urge you to do that. I mean, the beauty of the poetry has to be experienced in the original.
I think that was very beautiful. And I think the translations, in a sense, worked for me because I read them as interludes of poetry in the middle of a spiritual novel, and therefore extensions both of the word sense that was going on and the spirit that was spilling through these poems. But would you like to talk a little about the challenges of translation of these particular kafis?
Absolutely, absolutely. This was one of the biggest challenges, and you know, those of you who've even dabbled a little will understand this very intuitively, that translating poetry from one language to another is fraught. And when we're talking about spiritual poetry, it becomes an order of magnitude more difficult. Now, this is not a new struggle for me, by the way. I've been struggling with this for a little bit of time. So one of my previous books, The Story of the Sikhs, is a retelling of the lives of the Sikh gurus, the first, the 10 Sikh gurus. And there are a lot of selections of poetry from the Sikh scripture, the Guru Granth Sahib, which is of course in verse. And then there's a second Granth of the Sikhs, which is not quite scripture. It's called the Dasam Granth. It's associated with the 10th Guru and has some of his writings and a bunch of other writings. And then there is this huge canon of Brajbhasha poetry written, you know, in the 17th and 18th centuries. It's very, very colorful. It has beautiful depictions of the lives of the gurus and, you know, various sort of battles and important points in their lives. So I've been struggling with that for years now, and really haven't been able to find a very good quote-unquote solution. As an engineer, I'm always looking for solutions. So these are some of the things that I've done which have helped me. First of all, I've completely given up on translating to the letter, because you end up with something that's prosaic to the point of being ugly. Of course, when you start translating to the spirit, then you, especially when it's scripture, you end up upsetting some people because they believe that you've tampered with it. So, but that's what I try to do. And my goal is very modest. I feel that if I'm able to convey even 10% of the bhav of the original, it's success of some sort. But it continues to be a challenge. And here I have to talk about one of my, another favorite writer of my youth, which is Mela Chiragan. And in one of his essays, he writes, the title of the essay is Litos. I read it a long time ago, but it stuck with me. In which he basically, you know, Litos is a word, and he talks about, the whole essay is about how the word defies translation. And in the Punjabi language in particular, I encounter those words every day. You can write a paragraph paraphrasing what the word means, but trying to, you know, come up with a synonym for it in English, impossible. So it remains a challenge. But maybe you can tell us about some of your experiences.
I think, you know, we have enough on our table right now, so I will keep I really am interested in hearing much more about you and your work, because I find this a very interesting subject, personally as well. So I was wondering, when you were talking about Biraha as the sthayi bhava of many of these works, and therefore the language of loss and longing and lament, especially to a nation like Punjab that has suffered multiple eviscerations and divisions and war, must be fundamental in some way to you know, the expression of the soul of the nation. Then to carry this over to English must have been a greater struggle. But I wanted to know, where do you live?
The answer to that is, I live in English, and I grew up in Sikkim, which is as far from Punjab and Punjabi culture as one can be on the Indian subcontinent. So there were literally 2 Sikh families in Gangtok when I was growing up. Fortunately, my parents insisted that we speak Punjabi at home. So I grew up being able to speak Punjabi. Gurmukhi I taught myself to read when I was in the US in my mid to late 20s. So I really aspire to write in Punjabi. Maybe it's going to happen in my next lifetime, because unfortunately I still think in English. Case in point is this, one of my new projects is a play that we did. It's an adaptation of Julius Caesar, the very turbulent 90s. So when I was writing that play, what did I do? I wrote it in English because I don't know how to do it any other way. So the play was completed. I contacted the company that's producing it, and we chatted, and we absolutely agreed that in this very Punjabi, rural Punjabi setting, having these characters spouting highfalutin English is going to be, cringeworthy. So we were in absolute agreement. So that's when I took my first halting steps at translating something into Punjabi. So it's done, and it's given me a fair amount of confidence. So hopefully someday I will have the confidence to translate this book to Punjabi as well. It's something that I intend to try at least. But I'll be the first to admit that my Punjabi is probably very, very simple to the point of being simplistic. It's definitely not elegant. I mean, I can say that with confidence.
But this is really interesting because I think what we have here is self-translation. In the sense, you start a work that is in English. Presumably Shakespeare never worried about the fact that these were people who would have been speaking Latin. I mean, Julius Caesar is not likely to be actually speaking English. Then it travels into a Punjabi sphere, but retains its original language, in the sense you write it in English, and then you move it to Punjabi. I find that a fascinating trajectory, but I'm interested in that last step. Was there a point at which you looked at your text in English and thought, I wish I could, Punjabi is not going to be able to hold this line. So then did you change it to suit them? Did you cheat?
I had to cheat at times, and I think it was okay. I gave myself poetic license, quote unquote. But there was something else that was going on, which was very helpful. My English text was peppered with translations of the original, of several poetic works. So again, the same things that I referred to when I was talking about my book on Sikh history. In addition, the Jannama of Shah Muhammad, who wrote in Punjabi about the fall of the Sikh Empire. And a lot of his poetry is about arrogance and, pride. Indeed, nafs, indeed, all about nafs. So it fit very well. So the biggest cheating was that, when I went from English to Punjabi, I could dump my somewhat clunky translations of the original into English and bring back the originals. So it was cheating of a very fortunate kind, I think.
Yeah. I did want to address, the notion. We now have this notion of the homosocial, the homoerotic, and homosexual, all of which can come into play. And I think different communities would look at this relationship between Madho and Lal Hussain in different ways, and each would make a choice about where this relationship fits, as long as it suited them, to suit their gender. I think I'd like to know how you negotiated this terrain.
Sure. I sort of summarized it at the start of our conversation that after I did all of my digging, I did look at the translations of the Hakikat al-Fukra, the document that Scott Kugel, for instance, refers to. I was not able to find anything resembling concrete evidence that pointed to the fundamental nature of the relationship. So I was happy in my own mind, finessing the issue somewhat, if you will, and leaving it somewhat mysterious. And I truly want readers to come to their own conclusions as well. But I will not dodge the question, from a very sort of personal point of view. All of us are many things, and our worldview is influenced by a variety of things that we experience in life. Speaking for myself, this wasn't always the case with me. After my mid-20s, I feel that In a lot of instances, my worldview is shaped by my faith, and every faith has many different aspects. There are certain aspects of the Sikh faith which are particularly dear to me. One of them is, you shall not judge. That is fundamentally important to me. I mean, this sentiment appears in the writings of the Sikh Gurus. It appears in the writings of the Hindu Bhagats and the Muslim Peers, whose writings are also included in the Guru Granth Sahib. Sheikh Farid, for instance, who was a predecessor when it came to writing fabulous Punjabi poetry of Shah Hussain's. So I personally approach the relationship with an absolute lack of judgment. And I feel that when you do it that way, it doesn't matter what the nature of the relationship was. I mean, what business is it of ours anyway? At the end of the day, their relationship was their relationship. It meant a great deal to them, obviously, to the point that it has sort of, the story of that has survived. And, it's really become the center of this. If you've seen images of Mela Chiragan in Pakistan, which happens every year in the Urs of Shah Hussain, there's this uninhibited celebration and outpouring of love with music and dance. That's the essence of their love, and that's good enough for me. I don't need to come up with an answer one way or the other. And I would urge readers to similarly approach it with a lack of judgment. We'll never know. And it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter.
I find it also interesting that one of the key witnesses to this love affair is placed in, and no spoilers here, but placed in a very interesting position where there could be binocularity, as it were. The ability to see from two different perspectives. We leave it at that.
Indeed.
And what I think you should do now is read a section of the book.
I would be delighted to do that.
Would you like some warm water?
No, this is good. This is good. I'm actually on the mend. It sounds worse than it is. I've done my homework and put a bookmark somewhere. Okay, this is from chapter 5 in the book. That morning, for the first time in weeks, my had seemed to be his interest in something after days of silence. Since that humiliating visit to Madho's home, my master had barely spoken, and his eyes were full of anguish. A dark sadness had settled in my heart as well. I had tried to console myself that perhaps my master had a plan. After all, he was a malamati. Maybe he was deliberately seeking the humiliation that Madho was heaping on him. But I had never seen my master so downcast before. When he courted the abuse of the word to tame his nafs, he did so joyously. This was different. The more the cursed boy humiliated him, the more my master pursued him. But I saw no joy in him when he did this, only a desperate longing. When he was not debasing himself in front of the boy, he seemed to be wasting away. Madho came to visit Amba almost every night, and it appeared to me that he had told his entourage about my master, for every time the boys saw my master, they would snicker and whisper things to one another before breaking out in loud laughter. I wanted to hurl bricks at them, but if I had, my master would have disowned me. I seethed inwardly and pretended that I did not know the reason for the whispers and the ugly laughter. But I don't believe I fooled anyone. My master had become the laughing stock of all Lahore. All the other murids had begun to whisper behind my master's back, and some were talking of looking for a new murshid. I was the one most attached to him, and I suffered the most. There seemed to be no end in sight to my master's degradation, and while I never, not for an instant, thought of leaving him, I sank deeper into despair. I saw no hope, which is why I was so surprised when he announced the first morning of spring that we were going to the Basant celebrations at the Darbar of Data Ganjbakhsh and at Anwar's Haveli. However, though I was pleased to see him take an interest in anything after so long, I did not want to go to the Haveli. I had my reasons.
At this point, I'd like you to talk a little about the nafs, this idea of the great personification of the devil in the sense of a dog and a puppy at one point, which I thought was quite charming.
So, as I was reading about Shah Hussain, this was, excuse me, the aspect of his practice which intrigued me the most. And there's a reason for that. The notion of controlling your ego, but I can't speak with any authority to other religious traditions, but it's certainly tremendously important in the Sikh faith. Again, all the gurus in their writings talk about it constantly, and you're warned that terrible things are going to happen to you if you can't control your ego. And by the way, I would posit that all of us have experienced that firsthand in our lives. I mean, how many times have we gnashed our teeth at something that seemed so small in hindsight only because our ego got in the way? So this was something that was of great personal interest to me. And there's this passage in the book when Al-Khidr, the initiator, appears before Shah Hussain and talks to him about the various different Sufi paths and talks about the malamati path. And Shah Hussain asks him, is that going to be my path? And he says, well, you have to figure it out on your own. I don't have these answers for you. This is a difficult path. Personally, I am not a practitioner of Sufism, so I can't speak to, actual malamati practice. But this much I know from my own life, that every time you surrender to the indulgence of, going where your ego wants you to go, you suffer. And half the time you know that you're going to suffer, and yet you can't stop yourself. So it's no accident that, in the Sikh scripture, for instance, this warning against you must control your ego appears over and over and over again. And, for a malamati Sufi, this is the essence of their life. And I think they're onto something. Because if there are times when you can preempt something by pulling your ego back, the rewards are immediate. And imagine if you could live your entire life in this manner, the world would be a different place.
Would you give us a coffee with nafs in it, which looks like that?
Sure. I'll be delighted to. I have to think about that for a second. So, even more so than the nafs, I can think of a couple of coffees that speak to the malamati heart of Shah Hussain. So I'll sing a couple of lines from one of those. Is it off? So this coffee, for some reason, didn't make it to the book. I have no explanation. But it's one of my favorites, and You know, it's one of the first that I created a composition for. Humor me when I deal with all of my technology here. I thought I was off the hook and I put it away. भी साहिब तेरी बंदी हाँ मंदी हाँ कि चंगी हाँ मंदी हाँ कि चंगी हाँ गहरा लोग जाने गहरा लोक जाने दीवानी में रंग साहिब दे रंगी हाँ मंदी हाँ कि चंगी हाँ. The next line is the malamati heart of Shah Hussain expressing itself. साजन मेरा अखीं विच वसदा साजन मेरा अखीं विच वसदा मैं गलियां फिरां निसंगी हाँ मंदी हाँ कि चंगी हाँ मंदी हाँ कि चंगी. So let me talk about the words very briefly. Mandi haan ke changi haan, bhi sahib teri bandi haan. I might be base, low, I might be exalted. Whatever I am, I'm yours. The first verse, Gehra log jane devani, main rang sahib de rangi haan. The world thinks I'm crazy. They're ignorant. What they don't know is that everything I do because I'm imbued in the love of my beloved. And then, the punchline, as far as I'm concerned, Sajana mera akhi vich vasada, main galiye firan nisangi haan. So a few things to unpack here. Sajana mera akhi vich vasada. My beloved lives in my eyes. So I walk around with my beloved in my eyes. Main galiye firan nisangi haan. I walk the streets. And then here's a word that defies translation. Nisangi. Sang in Punjabi is shame, haya. Nisangi is the opposite of that. But this word doesn't quite translate to shameless or brazen. It's probably more unconcerned, uncaring. So think about this image that Shah Hussain is conjuring up. We're talking about the 16th century. He's speaking in the feminine voice, where all kinds of restrictions are placed on women. So the notion of a woman wandering the streets, quote unquote, brazenly, is shocking. So Shah Hussain says that with my beloved in my eyes, I, quote, brazenly walk the streets, totally unconcerned, uncaring. I don't care whose gaze is on me. That was his life. You know, he was a respected Muslim scholar. He was a hafiz at a very young age. He could recite the Quran Sharif. And then he spent more than 20 years in one of the most respected seminaries in Lahore, studying to be an Islamic scholar. And now all of a sudden, everyone's whispering about him. He shaved off his beard, which is sacrilege. He wears red robes. He, you know, struts the street of Lahore with a band of his followers dancing and singing. And oh, there are rumors that he drinks. So this is Shah Hussain, walking the streets, unconcerned. It's his malamati heart completely on display.
So in some senses, I think also, I'm also interested when we were talking earlier, you said that there were compositions and renderings or renditions of this music that you didn't approve of. That you didn't approve of in some way, and therefore you created your own. So I'd like to know what were the principles that you were guided by when you created these compositions?
So I have to explain myself. Some of the renderings are by storied musicians, you know, such as Nasr Ali Khan Sahab, Abdul Hamid, and they are beautiful. I mean, you know, they are absolutely wonderful. Maybe this is because I was limited by my own personal experience of Shah Hussain. I went for quiet when I was singing these kafis. And you know, you've heard the couple of compositions, all of them are in very similar vein. They're very understated and they're very quiet. And I lay no claim to quote unquote authenticity, for who the heck am I, you know? I'm an outsider to this world. My musical context is very different. So if I were to answer your question mundane manner, that my compositions, if I can even call them that, because eventually they are nothing but a playing back of what one has heard over a lifetime of listening. And mostly what I've heard in my lifetime has been, you know, Sikh sacred music, Karwaan, and also a lot of Shastriya Sangeet. I mean, I'm very fond of particular genres. So, Khayal in particular, and Bhupat, and I'm not a huge fan of some of the lighter versions. So that's where, you know, a lot of my preference comes from. Not to take anything away from the body of compositions that are out there. Hamid Ali Bela was one of the early singers of Shah Hussain, so you can still find a lot of his compositions. Patani Khan was another one. Many of them are rollicking compositions which are beautiful in their own way, but I guess I sort of stumbled upon Shah Hussain in a sort of quiet moment in my personal life, and that's what sort of translated into these compositions. This is a very personal thing, and I'm sure there are people who know much, much more about Sufi music who can talk about what's authentic and what's not. This is just me.
So this is not a challenge as a question, but just a question.
I know.
In many of the places you say, when the words are given by Shah Hussain to Maqbool, and Maqbool begins to sing, you give us the rag in which Maqbool has chosen to sing. Now, how did you choose that rag?
That was me cheating. It so happened that a lot of the kafis were composed before I started writing. So I just took the rag that my composition was on and stuck it in there. Now, later on, I actually discovered some things. So, you know, in the Sikh scripture, most of the Sikh scripture is composed and organized under specific rags. And there are some writers who ascribe certain drugs to Shah Hussain's kafis as well. I discovered them pretty late in the game, and I was already invested in my composition, so I cheated, and I stuck those in there.
Lovely. I think we'll now open for questions if anybody has something to ask in the audience. And if not, we'll just continue chatting for another 15 minutes. Would you like to read another section, perhaps?
I'll be happy to do that. And I'm also going to give one of my friends an assignment. Do you mind taking a couple of pictures while we're chatting? I curse the day when my Murshid clapped eyes on Madho, for until that black, God-forsaken day, I, Makbul, had known the warmth of my Murshid's love. And then, in an instant, I was displaced. Of parting, the pain is intense. O mother, where shall I turn? Rises from his fire smoke, and red is its burn. My Murshid wrote these words: this bread of sorrow, this stew of thorns, cooked on a flame of sighs. These words are soaked in the beauty of pain. He wrote them yesterday, writhing in agony. It was late in the evening, and as soon as he finished writing his kafi, he called me to him. Tabjir Makbul, sing this, he said, reciting the words for me. I tried to forget my hurt and anger, and began a leisurely alap in Rag Dilang. I decided that these verses would be best set to the Punjabi Teka, and composed a lilting melody on the spot with 16 beats. I looked at my Murshid as I sang. Ordinarily, he would be beaming by now and nodding appreciatively, and a wah or two of appreciation or a mashallah would escape his lips spontaneously. But today, he gazed blankly into space, breathing with difficulty, silent tears flowing from his eyes. He seemed oblivious to my voice, which exists only to sing for him. I have no use for it if it does not touch him. My Murshid suffers, seeking, weeping. My heart breaks. I want to kill that Hindu bastard my Murshid weeps for. But to talk about my Murshid. His beautiful words have the power to melt the hardest hearts, and people are moved to tears and rapture when his words find my voice. For I can sing. Yes, I can really sing. Singing is in my blood. I'm a Marasi, and I say this without shame. Why should I feel ashamed? I'm from the house of Mardana, who sang in the wake of Baba Nanak all the way to Mecca and back. My low caste has never mattered to me, not since I found the cool, deep shade of my Murshid. You see, my Murshid is a malamati. He has to work hard to seek the opprobrium, the abuse of the world, in order to fight with his nafs, his ego. Makbul Marasi never had this problem. By Allah's grace, I was born a malamati. No land, no possessions, no status. And yet, this nafs is a haram on you. I would swoon with pride, drunk with happiness, as I saw the joy in my Murshid's face when I sang his kalams. And now, it feels like I have nobody to sing for. All that my Murshid can think of is